Yeah. All right. Well, good morning, Life Point. I hope you're all doing well this morning. Yeah. You know, it's funny. Everybody keeps saying, welcome back. How was your vacation? It feels like it was like last year already. It's like, what? Oh, yeah. But thank you. So this morning, we're going to begin our new sermon series this morning, which is going to be really exciting. And it's kind of crazy because we've been in the Gospels for so long. It feels like we should just continue to just study that over and over and over. The Gospels in chronological order was such a cool study. And I don't know about you guys, but I know I got a lot out of it, looking at it from a whole perspective. Typically, you study one gospel at a time, and even on holidays like Easter and Palm Sunday, you kind of pull just that one little account, and you kind of study that little chunk of Scripture. And I thought it was really cool the way that everything came together and painted a more 3D image, I guess, of Jesus and who he was and what his ministry looked like. And it was such an interesting study. And I hope you guys got a lot out of it. That's my prayer, is that was a fruitful study for everybody. And if you missed any of them, they're all online in a playlist on YouTube. There's a couple of them that didn't work for technical issues, but there's 91 messages in that sermon series. So this one is not going to be quite as long, but it's going to be a good one. All right, so let's go ahead and get started this morning. All right. So have you ever felt trapped? Have you ever felt like you're stuck in a situation that just seems impossible to get out of? That's just weighing you down. Maybe it's even something like a difficult relationship, or maybe it's even like a dead-end job. There's so many different struggles, some sort of a stubborn struggle that we deal with. We deal with them all the time in all different capacities. And it might not even be like that. It might just be the weight of daily life. It might just be this pressure that's pressing down on you, feeling like you're restricted almost, feeling like you're bound, or even something like feeling like there's something missing, like feeling like there's got to be something more, something different. All of those things are very human things. Those are very human ways to feel. Those are part of the human existence, part of the human experience. But those are deeply rooted feelings, and it's this longing for something or wanting to even be free from something. All of those are at the center of this new sermon series, all of those things, this new adventure together. It's a sermon series through the powerful and foundational book of Exodus. And I've called this sermon series Exodus, an adventure of faith. Because that's what it is. Actually, the word Exodus means to go out, or it means to depart. It means to leave. And this study it's not just some ancient historical account. That's not what this is. It's a timeless story that continually resonates with the human heart. It's a powerful story, and we get to meet the Israelites as they're under the heavy hand and slavery of slavery in Egypt. And for generations, they dealt with things like oppression and things like suffering and the heavy weight of hard labor. And they actually cried out for deliverance. God, save us. They cried out for a way out of that bondage. And we tend to focus so much on that aspect of it, the slavery and the bondage, but this book isn't even just about their suffering. It's about the dramatic and powerful intervention of God. That's what we're going to see in this book. It's a story that's filled with miracles. It's a story that's filled with courage and faith and the steadfast love of a God that we worship, a God who hears the cries of his people. We're going to witness the rise of this unlikely leader, a guy named Moses. We're going to witness the clash between the wills of God and the wills of man, the wills of Pharaoh. We're going to see those plagues that shook an entire empire. Not to mention that miraculous parting of the Red Sea that we always imagine. When we think of Moses, we always picture the parting of the Red Sea that actually became this symbol of liberation, this symbol of freedom. So it's not just a historical account, and it's not just a narrative either. We're going to learn about God in this book. We're going to discover the truths about God's character in this book. We're going to learn about his justice. We're going to learn about his mercy. We're going to see faithfulness to his promises. And we're going to see his pursuit of his people. And we're going to see all kinds of different things in this book, from freedom to redemption to even identity to law and justice. We're going to see the beginnings of a covenant between God and his nation. And we're also going to see how all of this ties back into Jesus, right? And how that relationship between God and his people points to the ultimate exodus that we find in Jesus. So over the next several months, it's going to take us into next year, we're going to walk alongside the Israelites through their trials and their tribulations and their struggles and their pains, but we're also going to walk with them through their triumphs and their victories. And we're going to see the challenges that they faced, and we're going to learn lessons for our own lives. We're going to see how God's liberating power wasn't just for the Israelites a whole long time ago, but it's still for us today. It's the same God that we serve today. Now, as for the structure of this book, just really quick before we get into it, it's typically structured in two different parts. That's kind of how it's looked at. The first section, which is chapters 1 through 18, so 18 chapters, almost half the book, it narrates the deliverance of the Israelites from their bondage in Egypt. And in those first 18 chapters, we're going to see things like oppression. You're going to see God's call to Moses to stand up and be a leader. You're going to see the 10 plagues that were unleashed on Egypt. You're going to see the institution of the Passover. And we're going to study the Exodus itself, followed by that crossing of the Red Sea. All of that's going to be encompassed in the first 18 chapters of this book. And then that first section is going to conclude with Israel's journey into the wilderness, which sets the stage for the next part of their relationship with God. So it's not just God's deliverance, but it's also establishing a true, deep, and meaningful connection with God. Because the second section of Exodus, which is chapters 19 through 40, it shifts focus from all that to a covenant that's established at Mount Sinai. God gives the 10 commandments, and he establishes a relationship between himself and the nation of Israel. And not only that, but we get to go into the details of the instructions of the construction of the tabernacle, which was kind of this portable sanctuary that was supposed to be God's dwelling place with his people. We're going to go through all of that in the next, less than a year. So starting this morning, I invite you to join me on this exciting adventure, an adventure of faith through the book of Exodus. So I just invite you guys to open up your hearts and your minds to God's message of deliverance and hope in this book. And I pray that we all grow closer to God, that leads his people out of darkness and into the light of freedom, not just in the book of Exodus, but still today, every single day. So are you ready to embark on this together, on this adventure? All right. So let's look at the first 4 verses in the book of Exodus, chapter 1. It says, "Now these are the names of the son of Israel who came to Egypt with Jacob. They came, each one with his household, Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, Benjamin, Dan, and Naphtali, Gad, and Asher." So these opening verses to the book of Exodus, it's actually a kind of a transition from the book of Genesis to the book of Exodus. These names are Jacob's sons who came into Egypt with him. And the reason it's important is because each of their households, what they would actually do is further establish the lineage that would eventually grow into the entire nation of Egypt. Joseph, Jacob's son, who was sold into slavery in Egypt, he rose to be kind of a powerful governor in Egypt. But then this severe famine hit, and Jacob sent his sons to Egypt for food. And in Egypt, they unknowingly met Joseph, who eventually revealed himself. And they eventually moved the entire family to a place called Goshen in Egypt. So even though this book is new for us to study in terms of sermon series here, Exodus does not really begin with a completely new story. Exodus follows directly from the promises and the movements and the things going on in the book of Genesis. And notice how it says they came, each one with his household. It was their entire families that came with them to Egypt. So you can imagine this really sets the stage for the population growth that we're going to see later. There's kind of a miraculous population growth that comes from these guys and their families. So they were actually the ancestors of the people who would eventually become the slaves in Egypt. They are the foundation of the nation that God would, in fact, deliver. And them being in Egypt was part of God's plan, even though it would lead into slavery, but all of it comes together. That's what's so amazing about this book, is you see God's plan. You see how it's always been God's plan. And even though things might be bad and things might be hard, God uses those things to further his plan. It's all part of the same plan. And those verses, those 4 verses name 11 of the 12 patriarchs of the 12 tribes of Israel. And the last one, Joseph, is actually in this next verse. If you look at verse 5, it says, all the people who descended from Jacob were 70 people, but Joseph was already in Egypt. So there were 70 people that went to Egypt. And then with Joseph's family, it would be 74 people. That's a pretty good number of people. Though it does seem to be small, knowing just how big their nation would become. Kind of humble beginnings here. And Genesis tells us that Joseph was sold into slavery in Egypt years before this happened, before the other 11 came. But that's how him and his family were already established in Egypt. And even though he wasn't part of that migration of the 70 people that came over, him and his family are still included in that broader scope of Jacob's family in Egypt. So you can assume the fact that they were already there probably helped the other guys in terms of establishing themselves. It probably helped them actually come over in the first place because they already had family established there. Now this verse seems like it's just like vague information. Just like, okay, these guys came with their families and this guy was already there. It seems like it's just kind of an informational verse, but it doesn't seem like it's super important, but in reality, this verse helps us to ground the entire story in the historical context that was established in the book of Genesis. It all comes together. And again, all of this establishes how God is so awesome in all of this. You see God's intervention throughout this book nonstop. Taking a small family and transforming this family into a great nation, despite all of the things that we're going to get into in this book. And even just in this first chapter, you're going to see a lot of stuff that the nation of Israel has to face, even in their humble beginnings. Exodus 1, verse 6, it says, and Joseph died and all his brothers and all that generation. So again, this is giving us even more context here, painting us the beginning of this story here. And it kind of fast forwards history a little bit. It fast forwards an entire generation, actually. And it sets the stage for the next events where the new generation of Israelites are going to begin facing that oppression in Egypt. In a way, this is kind of an end of an era. And it's interesting it does it in just 6 verses. It just says, hey, all these guys came over and they established themselves here, and now we fast forward an entire generation. But Joseph, he used his higher standing in Egypt as a way to kind of provide for and to protect his family. But now that some time has passed, Joseph being dead and that time moving forward, things start to change. Things are a little bit different at this point. And again, it's going to lead to their eventual slavery here. But it wasn't just his passing. It wasn't just Joseph passing. It was his entire generation. That entire generation had passed. So it's talking about the passing of all of the original 12 sons of Jacob that migrated to Egypt. And again, it's worth mentioning that they were the 12 patriarchs of the 12 tribes of Israel. So the entire generation had come to Egypt with Jacob. They've all passed away. And there's going to be a complete shift in the demographic and the social and political landscape are all going to change. It's all completely different for the Israelites in Egypt. And again, we're going to see it pretty quick here. But just that one simple verse there provides a really big chunk of context for us. And as we're going to see, that simple verse does mark an end of an era of relative peace and somewhat prosperity for the Israelites in Egypt. Now, this passing of this entire generation almost creates a void, kind of. It paves the way for the rise of new Egyptian leadership. And that new Egyptian leadership didn't quite feel the same way about the Israelites and about Joseph and his people. And again, this sets the stage for that oppression and the enslavement that we're going to become really familiar with in this book. But again, it also sets the stage for God's plan to be revealed a little more. As we go through this book, you see God's plan unfolding and being executed. And it shows us the real need for the Exodus and God's intervention. Verse 7 says, "But the sons of Israel were fruitful and increased greatly and multiplied and became exceedingly mighty, so that the land was filled with them." So another verse with even more context for us. These first several verses are kind of giving us a lot of information as to where we are right now, as to where the story starts. And it seems that there was some sort of a remarkable growth and multiplication of the Israelites in Egypt. Because it says they were fruitful and increased greatly. But there seems to be some sort of extraordinary nature to their fertility. They seem to be really fertile. It seems that God's already working in them. Some sort of divine blessing on them. And it kind of echoes that command in Genesis where it says, be fruitful and multiply. Now, despite being in this foreign land in Egypt, God's promise to Abraham was actually being fulfilled here. God's promise to Abraham was to make his family a great nation. So it seems that this wasn't just kind of steady, slow growth, but it was this surge in population. And if you look at just the scale of their growth, it says that they became exceedingly mighty. So not only were their numbers increasing, but their strength was too. Not necessarily in the form of like military power, like that kind of strength at this point, but in terms of just their sheer number and their presence. There's a lot of them. They were becoming a really significant kind of demographic force in Egypt. And they've spread throughout Egypt at this point too. You can imagine they become a really visible presence in Egypt. And of course, people try to make sense of this verse because a lot of times if there's anything miraculous that happens, they got to try to figure out a more logical or a more scientific stance behind it. A lot of people wonder how it's possible that you saw this exponential growth in such a short amount of time. Most look at it as being divine intervention. And I mean, given the context of Jesus being involved in intervening and being present in every single chapter in this book, that makes sense. God was directly involved in fulfilling the Abrahamic covenant and making them a great nation. Other people try to justify it, and they try to look at things like, oh, well, maybe it was high birth rates. Maybe the Israelites were all having multiple children. Things like lower mortality because of the way they were living and higher fertility. Other people are wondering if the wording in verse 6, maybe that wasn't worded correctly. Because the term for generation in verse 6 might not be that typical kind of 30-year period that we think of as a generation. From the time they arrived in Egypt to the time of their oppression, it's possible that was a longer period than what modern scholars would consider a single generation. But it's most likely that there was a combination of things going on that contributed to those high number of Israelites and their growth as a nation. And again, they're not contradictory at all. They don't contradict each other. Instead, it's more of an amalgamation of things that God used to continue his plan to move forward, which makes sense. Regardless, despite being in that foreign land, they flourished and they multiplied, and it was to an exceedingly large degree. It was kind of abnormal how quickly they grew. So let's see what else these early verses are building for us here. Continuing along in verse 8, it says, "A new king arose over Egypt, who did not know Joseph." So even more information setting the stage for us. But this verse marks kind of a turning point in the narrative here, because there's this new king that arose over Egypt, and he didn't know Joseph. This new Pharaoh did not know who Joseph was. It's not necessarily that he didn't know who he was, but it's possible he just didn't care. Then this change in leadership and the lack of recognition for Joseph and his past contributions and his status, that's what paves the way for the oppression of the Israelites. And we're going to see it spelled out here throughout the rest of this chapter. There's this new Pharaoh in Egypt. And it's possible it could have been a whole change in dynasty. It kind of alludes that there might have been a substantial change. It might have been a whole new dynasty. But it's also probable that it was just a new ruler, a new king, a new Pharaoh that had no personal connection or knowledge of Joseph and his history in Egypt. The phrase a new king doesn't necessarily mean it was like a whole new dynasty, but at the very least, he's a different ruler. He's a different guy, and he had a very different attitude towards the Israelites. This new king came to power sometime after that generation of Joseph died. So it seems like this new Pharaoh is kind of unaware of Joseph's role in saving Egypt from that famine. And he's unaware of the favor that was shown to his family because of that. It's either that he was unaware or he just chose to actively disregard that history for his own political purposes. And given what we're going to see about him, it seems like it might be kind of a combination of the two. But as we'll see, either way, it was not good for the Israelites. Look at verses 9 and 10. It says, he said to his people, behold, the people of the sons of Israel are too many and too mighty for us. Come, let's deal shrewdly with them. Otherwise, they will multiply, and in the event of war, they will also join those who hate us and fight against us and depart from the land. So this new king's a little worried about the Israelites and how many there are. And you can see how he's trying to be politically strategic here. He's worried about his kingdom. He's worried about his reign here. And he views them as a potential threat because there's so many of them. And he worries that if a war breaks out or something happens, the Israelites in their vast numbers are going to side with Egypt's enemies. And then they're going to escape the land, and it's not going to be good. So his fear is what initially motivates his plan to oppress the Israelites. Now, aside from just the oppression, he's trying to be a preemptive leader here. And preemptive is he's concerned about the sheer number and the increasing strength and size of the Israelites. And he's looking at it as kind of just a demographic reality. There's a lot of Israelites here, and it could potentially be bad for us. So he's trying to be preemptive and trying to get in front of any kind of conflict he might run into. The Israelites have become a really large population and big enough to where he recognizes that they might be too strong for the Egyptians already where they're at. So the king kind of comes up with this plan to try to remedy the situation. He says, let's deal with them shrewdly, which is interesting. Because they're not oppressing the Israelites initially just to be evil or to be cruel. They weren't just trying to be mean to them. It was deliberate policy. It was something he enacted that was a political policy. Let's deal with them shrewdly to slow their rate of growth. And the king saw them as a threat to their power and saw them as a threat to their dominance, so the king wants to stop it. And not only that, he's worried that they would all leave. They would all just leave Egypt. He was worried that if the Egyptians or the Israelites left, he's going to lose a lot of that labor and a lot of that influence and power. So the king was paranoid about this kind of internal rebellion and the loss of his workforce, as well as potentially being beaten by an enemy. So this new king, who, again, he lacks that kind of historical perspective of Joseph and his family and his contributions, he saw the kind of booming Israelite population. He looked at it with suspicion and with fear. He was uncomfortable about it. He saw them as a potential threat, and he was worried about their eventual departure from Egypt. So again, he proposed this solution to suppress their growth and try to maintain control over the Egyptians. Fear and political power can lead to injustice and mistreatment, and that's exactly what we see here. Verses 11 and 12. So they appointed taskmasters over them to oppress them with hard labor. And they built for Pharaoh storage cities, Pithom and Ramses. But the more they oppressed them, the more they multiplied, and the more they spread out, so that they dreaded the sons of Israel. So the king said, we got to deal with them harshly. He says, we have to deal with them shrewdly. And this is pretty shrewd, forced labor. It's forced labor under these taskmasters that he appointed. People were appointed to oppress them with what they call hard labor. It's deliberate oppression. Again, this is policy that he enacted. It was designed to make life difficult and to discourage reproduction. They're getting too big, make their lives miserable so that they won't continue to grow.